So just to let you guys know, this virtual roundtable discussion is a part of the grade level reading week for 2024, known as GLR week. And today we are joined by state and local leaders who will share their unique perspective on solutions and successes, challenges and lessons learned, and accelerating early literacy at both the policy and the program level to produce meaningful change and accelerate literacy outcomes. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Sean Ross, who currently serves as the Executive Director of the State Board of Education, Heather Henderson, who serves as the Chief Academic Officer for Arizona Charter Academy, Amber Skalsky, who serves as the Program Director for the Steele Foundation, and last but certainly not least, Terri Clark, who serves as the Arizona State Literacy Director for Read On Arizona. Give each of them a warm welcome, and we are just going to jump right on in and get everything started and kick everything off. So I'm actually going to start with Terri Clark. So as I stated, Terri Clark currently serves as Arizona's Literacy Director and helps to guide the work of Read On Arizona, the state's Early Literacy Collective Impact Model Initiative. And so we're going to start with Terri. Can you share with us why early literacy is so vitally important? You're on mute, Terri.
Thank you. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Lori, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I really wanted to just sort of tee up some critical things that are driving the work of Read On Arizona and our collaborative partners. And that first question, Lori, the why is early literacy a priority, is really because the abilities needed to be a good reader start developing way before a student enters even kindergarten, and learning happens before as they prepare for school success in those critical early years. But also research shows that there's a clear understanding of how skilled reading develops and how most effectively to support children, including especially struggling readers, in learning to read. And all of that is sets them up for school success, not just in reading, but in math and science and all those other critical content areas that they go on to after those early grades. So for us, and what the research really shows and what this slide tries to sort of highlight is that 95% or more of children can be taught to read, according to research, if they're given the proper supports and interventions as early as possible. And so preschool age kids and children in grades, kindergarten and first grade, those are those critical years, and key foundational reading instruction skills are developed there. And so waiting till third grade to see if they're on track is it's too late. Another research stat that I like to really point people to is that vocabulary at 4 years old is one of the best indicators of a child being set up for reading success. So the early years and the early grades are really where the magic happens, as I like to say, to getting all children reading by third grade, which is our collective goal.
Thank you for that. And Terri, just as a follow-up, can you describe Arizona's comprehensive approach to ensuring that Arizona children are reading on grade level, and what progress has been made as a result of that comprehensive approach?
Sure. So Read On Arizona was launched not as a program, not as a standalone entity. It was really launched from that urgent, fervent belief that Arizona had to do more to help our young children develop the literacy skills they needed to be proficient readers and successful in school, and that working together is the only way that we're going to be able to do that. So the ongoing commitment of state and local partners to really work collectively in alignment with shared goals and measured strategies and investments is key to driving the long-term, large-scale improvements in third grade reading outcomes that Arizona desperately needs. So you see here, these are the shared priorities that Arizona partners have adopted, and that early literacy progress meter goal of by 2030, 72% reading by the end of third grade. And that goal is actually 90% by 2039. These are the priorities that really reflect a strategic, targeted approach to scaling what works and providing effective supports where they're most urgently needed, especially in economically disadvantaged communities and schools with the most struggling readers. And that ongoing collaborative work is really what Read on Arizona is committed and has really helped build that comprehensive approach that the state now has towards improving early literacy. Lori, can I go on and just sort of talk a little bit about the progress we've made so far? Because I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
So, as I said, I think it's important for us to recognize that Arizona has come a long way over since we really began this work in moving the needle. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, it's often called the Nation's Report Card. It's the only apples to apples comparison we have with other states, and it's administered every 2 years. And when we looked at the NAEP results for fourth grade reading, it's what they measure. From 2013 to 2022, Arizona was one of only 6 states to make gains in fourth grade reading. So I think that by itself is really, really significant. But then it's important to give a little perspective about what that means and where we started and where we've come. So way back in 2013, we were 45th among all states for all students taking the NAEP assessment for fourth grade reading. And I'm happy to say that we moved from 45th to 28th in the last 10 to 11 years. So we were bottom 5, and now we're middle of the pack, and we're just shy of that national average. So we still have a long way to go. As I said, when you look at the research and you know that 95% or more of kids can be taught to read, this is nowhere where we need to be, but it's important to keep in mind where we started. And the gains we've made, not just for all students, but those gains are similar for economically disadvantaged students, where we went from 47th out of all states in the nation to 28th. And I would be remiss if I didn't say this is a big thank you to so many of our partners that are on today on this call. This progress would not be possible without each and every one of them.
Thank you, Terri. I think it's important for us to think about the incremental progress that's been made over the last 10 years due to that comprehensive approach and due to those partners support that you were referencing. I want to shift gears a little bit to Sean Ross with the Arizona State Board of Education, another important partner at the table in conversation with this work. And Sean currently serves as the executive director of the Arizona State Board of Education. But prior to that, Sean served as a deputy associate superintendent of academic standards at the Arizona Department of Education. And currently, Sean, the state board is charged with the responsibility of regulating the conduct of the public school system, and recently has formed a K-3 literacy ad hoc committee to strengthen Arizona's K-3 literacy system. But I want you to talk a little bit about what policy changes have been adopted and implemented that really impact early literacy here in Arizona.
Yeah, thanks, Lori, and actually thanks, Terri, for queuing me up with that slide. The slide where we jump from 45th to 28th is it makes me happy. I can't wait for the next iteration where we go from 28th to 1st. I love that slide. And really the year, the time frame in that slide is interesting because it starts at 2013. And Arizona actually passed its K-3 reading legislation, Move On When Reading, in 2010. It was the second state in the country to do so after North Carolina. And it had a 3-year on-ramp. So it fully was implemented in 2013. And as part of that legislation, it allots about $45 million per year to K-3 reading. It's about $150 per K-3 student per school. And the funding is used for staffing, for coaches, for paraprofessionals, for teachers, for high quality evidence-based instructional materials. The funding is used for assessment materials, and it's used for professional development, evidence-based professional development. And so as part of that commitment Arizona has made in its K-3 reading legislation, it's funny because it's called Move On When Reading, And I wish I could wave a magic wand and change the title of it, because the move on part, the retention piece, is the smallest piece of that legislation. It impacts less than 0.03% of third graders each year. The focus of that legislation is really on early identification so that students get targeted intervention so that they're reading at or above grade level by the end of third grade, if not sooner. And you all are very familiar, most of you, especially practitioners in the field, are very familiar with this legislation, because at heart, what it does is it makes sure that every kid in kindergarten through third grade is given a valid universal literacy screener within the first 3 to 4 weeks of school. Students who are struggling readers are identified. They're given diagnostic assessments to zero in on their specific area of struggle. They're given targeted interventions, progress monitored, and then assessed so that eventually they exit that intervention and are reading independently at or above grade level. And so it really is one of the rare examples of a legislated RTI or MTSS system, which is fantastic, because I think of it, it not only is a bill that provides a lot of funding and supports to schools, but I think of it as this absolute commitment to that 95% that Terri talked about, that we as a state firmly believe that our children can and should read, that reading is a civil right, and that we are going to put our money in our legislation, where our mouths are. And so as part of that legislation, as I said, the schools screen their students within the first 3 weeks of school, and then they submit that data as well as an annual literacy plan to the Arizona Department of Education, where those plans are reviewed and technical assistance is supplied to schools to help them strengthen their literacy programs when needed. So the legislative story in Arizona kind of anchors there. Move On When Reading is the real anchor in that story, but it grows. And a few years later, dyslexia legislation made its way across the nation. And this is really important legislation in that it called for a couple of things that are really vital. One, it acknowledges the students who have characteristics consistent with dyslexia, and it acknowledges that those kiddos are struggling readers in the way that most readers are struggling readers. Now, there's a difference in frequency and dosage in what those kiddos may need, but the first step's the same for all of them. Dyslexia is not a special education issue. It's a tier 1 issue. And so if we strengthen our tier 1 instruction and we strengthen our training of teachers, we're going to help those students, all struggling readers, and then those kiddos with characteristics consistent with dyslexia, as well as part of our codified practices. And so this legislation came along and it called for students to be screened for a couple of new elements that weren't part of that screening and Move On When Reading. So what we did at the state is we called the vendors in most use in the state. We said, hey, would you be willing to add a couple of these elements at no charge to schools so that they can keep using their systems, their current coaches, their current assessment practices, and not have to assess kids more than once, and or at least not more often in that beginning of the school year? They said yes, so we partnered with them, and so that dyslexia screening was married to Move On When Reading. So again, that layering of legislation. The other component of the dyslexia legislation is ensuring that every school that serves K-3 students has at least one dyslexia designee on campus. And that would be a K-3, K-5 educator who has completed training approved by the Department of Ed in the science of reading. So originally, unfortunately, there were no dollars attached to that bill. However, since the advent of that bill, dollars have been attached, and there's a grant through ADE every year to pay for teachers to get that training. Now, the beauty of this, and again, the stacking of legislation, this is a comprehensive approach, as Terri discussed, as Lori discussed, then falls into this K-5 literacy endorsement from a few years ago, which is a requirement that all K-5 teachers of reading get the training in the science of reading. It's 6 credit hours in science of reading and science of reading intervention, assessment, and then dyslexia, or corresponding training hours, so that every teacher in the state by 2028 has a baseline understanding of effective evidence-based reading practices, so that every kid is given, we know teachers hold up the world. We owe it to teachers to train them well. And so by 2028, every K-5 teacher of reading in the state will have this training. The kiddos who are exiting educator prep programs are already getting these courses. So you're already seeing the influx. The two forces will meet, and the legislation, again, will stack upon itself so that we have a critical mass of teachers who are trained. We have funding going from Move On When Reading. We have training in dyslexia to serve our highest need students. And again, between 2013 and 2022, we jumped, made a huge jump, and that was sparked by the great work done at the policy level, at the practice level, and most importantly, in the classroom by teachers. But look how far we've come, look how far we're going to get.
Thank you, Sean. And one follow-up question, I know that you were alluding to it a bit when you talked about the stacking of the policy and legislation. Can you provide just a couple of examples of how that current policy and legislation is directly impacting classrooms and supporting students?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the bridging of policy and practice is the key, right? It's often the missing ingredient. And so we know that one of the legs of the table for success that Terri talked about is high quality evidence-based professional learning for teachers in the science of reading. So the Arizona Department of Education over the last 3 years, Lori and I were both employees there at this time, and many of those people are on this call with us today. We were able to train over 4,000 teachers in Letters Third Edition using ESSER funds. The department has also procured a free online training in the science of reading that it's making available to teachers to take. And it's been so successful that I know they have like a triple-digit waiting list. And so again, at that policy level, we're working hard to get more funding so that every teacher can take this training for free. And we know that teachers want to take this training. Again, teachers hold up the world. They're under so much pressure, but the thing that's beautiful about them is if you show them that something's going to work, they will, fight through fire to get to it to help their kiddos. And we know this for a fact because initially that dyslexia training legislation had no dollars. But then a couple of years ago, we were able to get $1 million a year from the governor's office and from the state budget. We opened a grant by which teachers could take that training. It opened on April 8th. It was out of money by June 6th. So, don't tell me teachers don't want high quality PD. Don't tell me teachers aren't willing to do the work, because they are, they always have been. And we just have to give them the right tools. We have to give them that high quality PD. Don't waste their time. And so the state has done a lot to help bridge that practice. And then we know that professional development alone is not the answer. There has to be a coaching component. There has to be an ongoing professional learning component. So the state has also funded coaching positions in the pre-K through third grade space. And those coaches have been hired and disseminated out to high needs districts. And some of those districts, I won't name names, but there's a couple of districts in particular that have already seen 125% improvement in their benchmark scores between their letters training and having a coach on staff. So it is really a great thing. I joke about this. Terri gets sick of me saying it, I'm sure, but in the course of just my career as an educator here, we've gone from, oh, Arizona, poor Arizona, to, oh, Arizona, like, look at you, because we're doing really innovative stuff and it's really paying off. And most importantly, not only do we know it's innovative, we know it's working, we know the direction to head, and we're all heading that direction together.
Thank you, Sean. And I don't think we ever tire of hearing oh, Arizona, look at you doing your thing over here in the early literacy space. And I 100% agree. And I'm sure many on this call would as well, that, teachers are hungry for high quality professional development paired with those coaching pieces. And on that note, I'm going to shift over to Heather Henderson. So Heather Henderson currently serves as the Chief Academic Officer for Arizona Charter Academy. And in a recent review of trend data, it showed that the Arizona Charter Academy had been making steady incremental progress in the area of early literacy and is actually outperforming pre-pandemic levels. Yes, applause, and clap for that, absolutely. But we know that is incremental. It takes, hard work, and it takes time, and it doesn't happen overnight. And so, Heather, in line with bridging policy to practice, can you share how you and your team use the state literacy plan required under Masseur to really guide and shape your work?
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. I think we're just one of probably many, many examples out there that are doing good things. I think what resonated me, just even listening to the last few speakers, is that really I really was one of those people who took that move on when reading as a retention policy. So when it first came out, you were kind of like, here it comes again, like some type of new law, something passed, and we really weren't sure what to do with it. So we've really gone through phases. Just a really brief about us, because I think it's important. We have about 1,000 students at Arizona Charter. We're 80% free and reduced, and we're 80% minority. And we're a K-8 school. And so when I say that we're in the trenches, we're in the trenches, and we've been in a battle for a really long time. What Move On When Reading has done, I think, for us in particular is, I always kind of call it, we've been in 4 phases. Our first phase was just indifference. I think you kind of get these policies, you're not really sure what to do with them. You know it's a mandate. But then I was like, it's just another retention policy. Like, what is that really going to do? How does that help us in the trenches? Once we got past that, we really got into a compliance factor, which I think is important, right? Like, if you're held accountable, you really start to at least have to fill something out and start putting some things in. And that's where we were at. And what I think the state did a really good job at was the compliance checklist really started to get us to think about some things, because when you had to start putting in the evidence-based, kind of like, what does this mean? You're putting your data in, and it really forced us to start looking at things. With that being said, I think we just have a strong leadership here that I think is really important. I think it's important that your entire leadership team really begins to understand what's happening. I wish I was faster at this. It's only been in this past few years that we've really put the pieces of the puzzle together, and we still are. And so I think Sean Ross said it really, really well when, if you could change that and get rid of that thought of move on, and really think, he said it in another conference, and I really resonated with me, is it's about the spirit of the law. The other thing that really excites me about this is I do believe that there is a lot of bridge of the policy to practice. And although it might seem intimidating, if you really just start from the beginning, it does work. And I also really believe in the 95%. So once that stat was put out, and I'm sure it's been out for a really long time, so I think we're a little slow sometimes for all that information to always get to us when we're in the trenches. But the minute that 95% came in, I was like, well, if 95% can do it, our kids can do it. Like, there's no difference in what's happening here. And so we really laid out step-by-step process, really got a good curriculum. It's not hard. I've spoke a few times here, and you try to put this into words, and there's nothing magical. If you really take that checklist and you start to make it a part of your culture, that's the biggest thing I would encourage people to do, is really think about the culture of what you're creating. And then also, I'm super excited, although it's hard. I'm not going to say it's not, that everyone should get the endorsement. However, there's a handful of us that have been through the course. At our school, we really believe that whatever we're going to have our teachers do, our leadership does. So there's about 7 of our leadership in the course right now. And I don't care what anyone says, like, whatever we think we know, we don't know, you take this and it just expands even more. I was really excited to hear Terri talk about vocabulary, because that's another important thing I think that we're just starting to endeavor upon. So in the end, I think it's really important that schools look at their strategic plan and that they really think about, how does reading become number one? We all talk about it, but how in actuality is it becoming number one in your school? Having very clear goals. The thing I love about Move On When Reading is, as a leader, I found it as a policy that was very focused, and it helped me to focus. The Title I, your consolidated plans can feel very broad, but Move On When Reading really narrows the focus. And I think if you look at it that way, also, it can really help you make some good decisions on what you want to do. In fact, our goals have been so clear on K-3. We used our ESSER funding to hire an interventionist. We have a very intricate model behind that. But when ESSER funding went away, it was one of the things that when we looked at our budget, we put that in as number one, instead of saying, well, here was all our COVID funding, so now we're going to cut all these positions. We reversed that thought process and we looked at our data. And to just give some quick highlights, it's just the first time in this kind of over the past 5 years where we really have seen a true triangle. So we truly have less than 4% of our kindergartners leaving in the red, and 90% are in the green and blue. And so I think that that's critical. And when you get that type of data and you start working that, your teacher excitement, they're hungry. And so since we have that saying, hey, there's this endorsement that's going to help us even more, and this is what it's going to do for us, it's exciting. So that fire is created, and working side by side with them and really looking at that, I think, is also critical as leaders. So that's just a few highlights, but we're definitely in the Kool-Aid of the science of reading, and I really encourage leaders to step back and think about it, because 95% is true, and I really believe it's doable.
Thank you, Heather. And I love that. I'm going to borrow that phrase of we're in the Kool-Aid as we think about, our early learning, our early literacy efforts. I think you've done such a great job talking about bridging that policy to practice, and how you've really sort of harnessed in on the move on when reading as, guiding your work through a strategic plan. Thinking about the progress that Arizona Charter Academy has made over the last few years, what do you feel has contributed to that incremental progress over that time?
So number one, I think it's our leadership, because we just believe it. So number one, you just have to say if 95% is what is said, then that's what we're going after, and there's just nothing else around that. So I think that's number one. Two, I think it's really important to think about, it's not charter, it's not district, it's not, what I love about this also is it's not political. Like, if you really want to think about it, we all want kids to read. It's something that we can all agree upon. And I think a slogan that we've used this last year to really work our way through transition, whether it's policy, politics, whatever it is, it's really thinking about meeting each student where they are, as they are. And if you really think about that and then ask yourself, what steps are you taking to get there? When you really use that checklist from Move On When Reading and make it a culture, you can meet each student where they are, as they are. And you just have to keep plugging away step by step. So I think that's really important. Another key component, I think, is teacher retention. That's important to think about on the sidelines. Our human resource department, everybody is in our classrooms. They're alongside looking at what the professional development looks like. They do classroom walkthroughs. And they do that so that when we're hiring and when we're keeping teachers, it's something that we're thinking about of the hard work going on, because I think that's necessary. And I think that if there was just, it's like, but I don't, how do we do this? Or, this just seems impossible. I really just strongly suggest leaning into the science of reading and leaning into that checklist, because it's all there. It's just taking it one step at a time. And then the other piece is really using your data to work for you. And when you really look at those universal screening, it's not just that tier. It's not the whole score. It's looking at the subtests. Moving forward for us, we just added in vocabulary. So we're excited to see where that takes us, because we find some really good success. And if there was any place I would tell people to start, look at the decoding area, the word reading spot, because you can get some quick wins if you follow the science of reading. And I think that builds momentum among teachers and the staff in general. And now we're just entering into vocabulary, and we're also dabbling in with the oral language and going to look at what that research does. Because we're still in a battle, right? Comprehension is still the battle, and that's where we're at, and we're just taking that one step at a time. So I would just encourage people to, instead of saying all the why it can't happen or all the barriers, just start slow and just start checking it off and start working your way through. It's doable.
Thank you, Heather. I appreciate, the concrete examples, the eyes on the prize, the idea that now is not the time to let off of the gas. It's, the time to really hit the gas and focus, to Terri's point on vocabulary, and comprehension, and always keeping in mind, to Terri's point earlier, that we're talking about what's happening in the pre-K years, kindergarten, first grade. Let's not lose sight of the importance of those grades as well. Thank you. I'm going to shift gears to Amber Skalsky with the Steele Foundation. Oftentimes when we talk about moving the needle in early literacy, we don't think about philanthropic partners sometimes. Amber currently serves as the program director for the Steele Foundation, a grant-making organization committed to helping children in underserved communities, both in and out of the classroom, birth through high school graduation. So we're glad that she's able to join us. Amber, I'm hoping that you can start off by sharing the Steele Foundation's approach to supporting early learning and literacy efforts here in Arizona.
Great. Thanks, Lori. Great to be here with Sean and Heather, and thank you, Lori and Terri, for including Steele. So I'll do a quick about us. Steele Foundation was founded in 1980 by a gentleman named Dan Cracchiolo. He was a first-generation Italian-American and a prominent lawyer here in Arizona. He's right here. Since our founding, we've invested over $100 million into the Arizona nonprofit community into various efforts, working with over 300 nonprofit organizations. Steele's mission is to improve the lives of Arizona's children through investments in education. We define that internally as one, traditional education efforts. So we break that into 3 areas: early childhood ed, specifically high quality preschools and early literacy efforts. Second, innovative K-12 programs within and outside of the school day. And third, pathways for first-generation college students getting to and through college. Steele also works within what we call cultural education, so providing arts access opportunities for kiddos here in the state. Within traditional education, as I mentioned, we have 3 pillars that drive our work, with the first of those being early childhood education. Within early childhood ed specifically, we target early literacy interventions for preschool through 3rd grade. And we align our early literacy strategy with the Arizona Education Progress Meters. Ultimately, we're looking to partner with evidence-based solutions to bolster 3rd grade reading. I would say our ethos is that we want children to learn to love to read and become confident, strong readers by 3rd grade. Within early literacy, Steele really takes a top-down, bottom-up approach in that we work with Read On Arizona as the state early literacy leader, so being able to have that strategic 30,000-foot view. And then we also fund community programs and school programs at the community level. For the latter, I just thought I would give Lori quick 2 examples of kind of some of the work that we're invested in early literacy. The first being with an organization called Literacy Connects that's based in Tucson, Arizona. Literacy Connects offers various community-based education programs. Steele specifically works with Literacy Connects, funding a program called Reading Seed, which is considered a targeted intervention. Reading Seed partners specifically with under-resourced elementary schools to provide children in grades K through 3rd grade with a one-to-one volunteer reading coach throughout the school year. Students also receive free books for at-home libraries. The coolest and most critical component and in the effort for Reading Seed is that volunteers meet with their students every week throughout the school year for 2 years. So it's a long-term, high-touch intervention. But ultimately, they're helping those students develop identities as readers and really exceptional learners. For us, one of the things that compelled us to invest in Reading Seed as well is that it is an evidence-backed program. Arizona Department of Education considers it a Tier 1 intervention, meaning the strongest evidence-based standard. So that was a big compelling move for us to be able to invest. I'll share in 2021, Steele funded Reading Seed at 1 school in central Tucson, where in its very first year, every single kindergartner at that school was matched with a Reading Seed volunteer. And those volunteers in a single year donated 1,500 hours and over 2,000 books to those kindergarten classes. What was amazing is at the conclusion of that year, every single teacher that was surveyed reported that 97% of their students now identified as a strong reader and developed dramatically their reading skills in 1 year. And Heather mentioned this earlier, but when you see that type of data, when you see that type of community and success for Steele, we're like, replicate it. How do we replicate that? Let's keep momentum going. So Reading Seed is now in 6 schools across Tucson. This upcoming school year, Steele's funding an additional school to help expand Reading Seed into South Tucson to a school where actually right now 8% of students are reading by 3rd grade. So we want to go to those really high need schools and commit long term with this type of top tier program. I would say what we've learned in this work with Literacy Connects over the last couple of years is that you have to be nimble. In the case of Reading Seed, we're in different schools with different leaders, with different volunteers, different demographic of students, and there is no one-size-fits-all approach, even with the same program. So by aligning around, I would say for us, an evidence-based intervention that has proven outcomes, and working in collaboration where everyone is willing to be nimble and take time to craft an approach for those specific students in that specific school, we're seeing these really incredible outcomes for kids. Another way we've supported early literacy efforts is through family engagement. So in this example, we worked with an organization called Make Way for Books, also in Tucson, based in Tucson, but expanding across the state. Within their, it's called their Digital Learning Project. This program is specifically for children and their families, their caregivers, and it provides ongoing bilingual literacy support for children ages 3 to 5. It is an incredibly innovative 2-generation model where children are learning simultaneously alongside their parents. It offers bilingual learning modules, which provide an interactive core curriculum. There's videos to engage children around stories, vocabulary, language growth, planting all those seeds really early on, while their parents are learning specifically strategies for how they can support their children's learning. One of the things I learned in this partnership as well is it's a virtual platform, and there's thousands of books virtually that families can engage with. A lot of those, not just bilingual, but leveraging dyslexia font. So for those kiddos that need that extra boost, I never knew there was a dyslexia font, but it's something that Make Way for Books integrated into their online virtual programming. For that intervention over 2 years, we saw 1,400 parents and 1,700 children reached through the digital platform. I think for us, what speaks to the power of the network of coordinated Read On Arizona partners is that in the case of Make Way for Books, while Steele was funding just this little component of the effort, other grant makers within Read On Arizona were helping grow Make Way for Books in this program in other geographies, in other locations with other families, collectively allowing us to reach thousands of families across the state. And because we have a common, I would say, early literacy lens, we can take this collective approach to really scaling successful solutions.
Thank you, Amber. I love hearing how you guys are using data to target, high needs communities, and the idea of being nimble. It's not one size fits all, and really thinking about how through your lens as a grant making organization, how you're thinking about how you're intentionally scaling up those literacy-based early learning programs that we know work. With that lens and with that hat on as a grant-making agency, what are some ways that grant-making agencies and philanthropic agencies can strategically support early literacy efforts?
Yeah, Laura, there's a few ways grant makers are strategically supporting literacy. I would say the first 2 ways I'll mention, which Steele is a part of, is through the Read On Arizona Advisory Board and the Read On Sustainability Working Group. So the Read On Advisory Board consists of a diverse group of cross-sector members. There's founding partners, philanthropic organizations, community stakeholders, and numerous agencies that are a part of this group. And what this group does is it really works together in coordination and alignment, using data to effectively identify strategies that we can bolster and scale across the state. And having that type of collective group, again, that's working together through a common lens, we're able to really link arms together and be able to infuse a lot of energy to make sure that we're scaling programs at an effective level. The Read On Arizona Advisory Board, I would say it's been critical to drive large-scale improvement in early literacy outcomes. And it's one of the most successful collaborative efforts that Steele has been a part of. It's where we're able to learn alongside our peers and grow and engage together. And I want to say, we always thought the word collaboration, it's hard, It is difficult, but those groups have allowed us to, I'd say, maintain and expand early literacy efforts, leverage shared resources, and develop a common nomenclature as a group. And we're constantly leaning on each other. In the case of Make Way for Books, it really, I think that serves as a strong example of how a coordinated collective effort helped us, again, link arms with our peers in the grant making space, identify opportunities to say, okay, let's coordinate. If, you know, as a philanthropist, if we're funding here and you can fund here, then we can create this tidal wave within this organization that has a successful intervention and bolster it and move it forward. I think, Lori, you might have said this earlier, everyone has a role to play. And it takes time to scale those effective solutions. So that strategic coordination on behalf of Read On Arizona, it's vital. And I would say that it is the secret sauce of the success that we've seen here in the state.
Thank you, Amber. And I love the, analogy of linking arms, right? That's when we think about collective impact model and having, shared goals, in common metrics really coming together around early literacy to move that needle in. And thankful for the role that grant making agencies and philanthropic agencies and founding partners have in helping to move that needle to accelerate early learning and early literacy in the state. I'm actually going to open up this next question to all of the panel members. What do you think is your vision for the next 3 to 5 years as it relates to accelerating literacy in the state? And Sean, if you don't mind, I'll actually start with you.
Yeah, absolutely, Lori. It's really about training a critical mass of teachers and administrators, and as a byproduct, very important byproduct, families. With the advent of the use of ESSER funds, training over 4,000 teachers. Many districts use ESSER funds to train their teachers in letters, third edition, and other high-quality evidence-based science of reading training. It's not just letters, but that just happens to be the most common one. And with the K-5 early literacy endorsement, and knowing that every teacher coming out of Ed Prep now in Arizona has those 2 courses in science of reading, and then every in-service teacher will have that training as well. That is really, the data has shown that that's going to move the needle in a real way. This is the key lever Mississippi used in its turnaround, in its state turnaround, which was the most rapid and dramatic over the last 7 years. And so I'm really excited for that, because I also think that, and we have some anecdotal data from Mississippi. We talked to Dr. Carrie Wright, who was their state superintendent who oversaw this work, about teacher recruitment and retention in a state that's experiencing that kind of success. And as I was a classroom teacher for 15 years. Nothing makes you happier than that light bulb going off, over your kiddo's head. And so to train all of these teachers, to add to their already unbelievable amount of expertise and artistry, their dedication, to give them what they need in order to succeed, and then to have that start impacting, these kids and these families is just going to be unbelievable. So I'm very, very excited to see. Again, I'm ready for that next slide. 45 to 28 was great. 28 to 1 will be even better.
Thank you. Terri, do you want to talk about the vision that you have for the next 3 to 5 years?
Sure. So I think Read On's vision over the next 3 to 5 years is sort of to stay the course. I talk about we're moving forward, not backwards. We're continuing to have our eye on that, accelerating the trajectory, as Sean just said so beautifully, and continuing to be focused and intentional on what it takes to improve outcomes and commit to doing it. And I think that commit to doing it is the piece we've sometimes been missing. So for us, and working, very closely with you, Lori, we've talked about expanding and increasing the collaboration to get to scale with what we know works, as well as leaning into the earlier ages and grades to ensure Arizona children start school ready to learn and stay on track for reading. I'm excited to share that we'll be launching this fall a state literacy hub. We're calling it Lit Hub AZ, that will provide evidence-based resources for educators, for families, and community partners across the age continuum, birth through the end of grade 12. So reading doesn't stop at third grade, and we need to make sure, and especially with the pandemic, we know some of our students in older grades need supports. And so we're going to continue to lean in to scaling evidence-based solutions and highlighting case studies, some of which you heard today, that demonstrate what's possible. So we can really believe that we get to that 95% or more for Arizona kids. I'll also say we're going to double down on ensuring kids are in school by coordinating efforts to decrease chronic absence. So more kids are in the classroom getting the important literacy instruction they need. That is a critical piece. If they're not there, they can't get the daily supports and practice that they need to become a proficient reader. And then finally, I think for us in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to continue to support communities and families so they can do their part in building Arizona's youngest readers, and specifically those most in need. Because you've heard me say it before, I can't stress it enough, how much the early years matter to building a reader. It does not start just when they enter the kindergarten doors. It starts day one or before. And what that means is we need to be as intentional of what they're getting and receiving in the early years, and really make early learning in the early years a right and something that every child in Arizona has access to. So we're going to push forward. We've always believed that. Read on Arizona has always been a birth through the end of third grade initiative. But those early years are becoming even more critical as we look at the data and the research coming out of the pandemic of how they've been impacted. So we want to work with our early learning partners to make that a reality.
Thank you. Heather or Amber, do you have anything to add in terms of the vision for the next 3 to 5 years?
I do. Piggybacking almost off of what both Sean and Terri were saying is with the literacy endorsement being K-5, what we're doing in our K-2 and our third grade program, we're going to replicate for 3-5 even stronger, because as you see that, everything everyone was saying, it doesn't stop at third and continuing, especially with those gaps from COVID. And then the other thing that we're doing is we've developed very strong partnerships with 12 preschools in our community that we visit and we give kinder readiness kits to. And so our next step is to really start to hit the reading aspect even more. So we're really looking forward to that. So it was kind of fun to listen to both Sean and Terri, and then being here on the ground, working through both sides of that.
Thank you. Amber?
Or, if I had to give our future strategy 3 words, I would say refine, focus, and intentionality is where Steele is headed. Specifically, our board just a few months ago approved a shift in strategy in that our annual allocation of funds will be committing 75% of our annual funding to traditional education efforts, so those early literacy efforts included, with 25% going to cultural education programming, because we know to move the needle in early lit, high school graduation, first generation college access, we've got to go all in as much as we can. Second to that, geographically, we've shrunk our footprint even more. So that's that hyper focusing that we're doing. Historically, Steele's always operated at a county-wide level, Maricopa County, Pima County. But earlier this year, we decided we're going to shrink that geographic footprint. We are going to be in Phoenix and Tucson, going all in as much as we can with our partners, past and new, to make sure that we're working in those zip codes with high need, high population needs. And then, I would say Steele wants to continue to stay engaged, obviously linked arms with our partners here, Read on Arizona. And we want to look to build up even more that broader ecosystem that Read On has already brought together, and which is incredibly vitally necessary to sustaining the change that we've already seen.
Thank you. So thank you all. At this time, we're going to open it up to any questions from our audience members who are joining us. If you use the chat feature, it will send the questions directly to the panelists. So we'll give just a little bit of time to see if we have any questions that come through from our audience members.
Lori, I know there were a couple of folks sent to me directly. regarding what universal literacy screeners are used in Arizona. So I put a link in the chat to the Department of Education's Move On When Reading page. And if you kind of navigate that page, you'll find the list of approved literacy screeners, which have been vetted by the department. They meet both Move On When Reading and dyslexia requirements. You'll see the list of approved core reading and intervention programs, which must be steeped in the science of reading and must meet one of the top 3 ESSA evidence level requirements. And so I just would point folks to those web pages are really, really helpful, and are a really good place to find some of that information.
Thank you, Sean. I have a question here, and we're going to direct this question at Heather. If you could elaborate a little more on how you use data to inform decision-making at your site.
Sure. So we obviously use the universal screening as number 1. And then what that does is help us see where our kiddos start. And then as they're growing, even more so though, we use the progress monitoring tool to fidelity in terms of looking at your subgroups. So for example, in kinder, we start really strong with phonemic awareness and really looking at that at the beginning of the year. As you start to see that build, we go to the nonsense word and decoding. So that's what I mean by really looking at your composite. And then if you really think about the science of reading and the progression, you're going to really want to start, if you're thinking about tier 1, right? Because you got to start there. You're going to look at almost by grade what subcomponents are important. And then obviously if there's a struggling reader, you keep backing it up to those different areas.
Thank you. So I'll put one, I think we have time for one other question, and I'll open this up to any of the panelists. So how could community partners support efforts to accelerate early literacy?
Can I take a stab at that one?
Yes.
And then any of my colleagues can please. I think that, this has been core and central to Read On Arizona's work and vision from the beginning, is that this happens at the local level, the real push and the real work. And so there are Read On communities throughout the state, but also where there aren't Read On communities. If you live in a community, reach out to local school partners or early childhood organizations and ask how you can help support them, whether it's volunteering to be a tutor or volunteering to read at story time at your local library. There's so many things, and this is what I've said from the beginning, and I think again why we've had so much success is we don't, and forgive me for my bluntness this morning, we don't want random acts of literacy kindness. We want targeted, intentional, focused efforts. So coming in and doing whatever, you feel like isn't what we need. We need, hey, what do you need? What does my community need? Where can I be the most help? And how do I lean in where I'm needed? And I think that you can go to our website, or there's partners on this call that you'd be happy to reach out, and they'd be happy to connect you with great programs that need volunteers, that need supports, that need literacy champions. And I think that's really what we're trying to build at the local community level, is just an army of literacy champions that will do what we need, that's evidence-based when we need it, and help us reach more kids so they reach their reading potential.
Thank you, Terri. I actually am going to put one other question that came from an audience member, and I will open this up to anyone. And it's actually a question about dual language learners. And so the question is, has Arizona learned lessons about how those screeners work or don't work well for children who are learning to read in English at the same time as learning to read in Spanish?
Yeah, Lori, so in particular, Spanish is the most spoken language, after English in the state, and it's a phonetic language. And so with Spanish speakers in particular, what works for the science of reading, what works for all new readers, works for all new readers. It works for, kids who are coming from a home, where Spanish is their first language, or English. It's really a combination of the evidence-based practices in the science of reading, but honoring the home language as well, right? The goal is not to stop them from speaking Spanish. The goal is to make them really effective speakers in whatever, you know, their native language may be. I use Spanish as an example because of my background, but it's, you know, and it's definitely, there is a plethora of research to show that using evidence-based practices in the science of reading is as beneficial for English language learners as it is for all students.
I would jump in and piggyback on that. So I also think that a lot of the screeners out now offer enhancements that I think are really helpful. And I definitely have not been paid to say any of this, but if you really look at the Science of Reading 2 and you start to take the courses, they give some really good insight on how to approach, even when there's similar letter sounds and the cognates and stuff like that. There's just some really good practical implementation that you can take right from the beginning. And so I would really encourage leaders of all areas, whether it's special education, ELL, Title I, however your school works, or if you're one that does it all, really think about looking at it from that lens, because there are some really good practical strategies right there. And even the curriculums and things have come out with some really nice screeners and things to help.
Thank you, Heather. I appreciate that. And I noticed that we are coming to the end of our time. So I wanted to take the opportunity to thank each of our panelists for joining us and sharing their expertise, sharing the challenges, the struggles, but also sharing, you know, that idea of being focused, of being intentional, and really being committed to doing what it takes, you know, that incremental progress to accelerating early literacy. And always remembering, I always borrow this phrase from Terri, that it takes 8 years to build a reader. But as Terri said, reading doesn't stop at 3rd grade. So having that focus across that birth through 12th grade continuum and doing what it takes and being committed to that steady progress in that area. So I want to thank each of you for joining us and hope that you guys have a great rest of your day.